The heavy brass deadbolt clicked shut. I lay paralyzed on the imported Carrara marble, gasping around the bitter, metallic taste of crushed oleander. Through the frosted glass, my husband's shadow tangled with my best friend's. "Just wait for her heart to stop, Arthur," she giggled. That was my reward for a decade of devotion. The cold of the stone floor seeped through my silk slip, chilling the blood that was rapidly slowing in my veins. It was October 14th, 2024, the night of the Hayes Foundation Charity Gala. I was supposed to be wearing the midnight blue Oscar de la Renta gown hanging on the door of my dressing room. Instead, I was dying on the floor of my own master bathroom in our $12 million Central Park West penthouse. My lungs burned. Every desperate pull of oxygen felt like inhaling shattered glass. The neurotoxin Chloe had mixed into my nightly chamomile tea, the tea she insisted on brewing for me because I had been so stressed lately, was remarkably efficient. It didn't just stop the heart, it paralyzed the diaphragm first. I was suffocating, fully conscious, trapped inside a failing body. "Is she gone yet?" Arthur's voice drifted through the thick oak and frosted glass of the bathroom door. He sounded annoyed, not panicked, not grieving. Annoyed, like I was a taxi running 5 minutes late. "Give it a minute, babe," Chloe replied, her tone dripping with that saccharine sweetness I had once found endearing. I heard the unmistakable sound of a zipper sliding down. "The doctor said it mimics a massive coronary. With her family history of heart defects, the coroner won't even look twice. The Hayes Empire is yours. Ours." I wanted to scream. I wanted to tear the door off its hinges and wrap my hands around their throats. I had given Arthur Pendleton everything. When we met, he was a struggling junior analyst drowning in student debt. I was the sole heiress to Hayes Global. I handed him my grandfather's company on a silver platter. I funded his lifestyle, polished his rough edges, and defended him when my board of directors called him a ruthless opportunist. And Chloe? I had plucked Chloe Davis out of the administrative pool. I paid for her sister's rehab. I made her my executive assistant, my confidant, my shadow. "She was always so pathetic," Arthur murmured. The sound of their wet, careless kissing echoed through the gap under the door. "Following me around with those big, needy eyes. Do you know how hard it was to touch her, knowing you were waiting for me?" A single tear broke free, tracking hotly across the bridge of my nose to pool in my ear. It wasn't a tear of sadness. It was a distillation of pure, unadulterated hatred. The sheer indignity of it, dying while the two people I loved most in the world desecrated my bedroom. My vision tunneled. The edges of the world bled into a muted, static grey. I felt the final violent spasm of my heart, a painful flutter against my ribs, and then the terrifying plunge into the dark. I didn't pray for peace in that final second. I prayed for vengeance. Gasp. My eyes snapped open. I jackknifed upward, my hands clawing at my throat, dragging in great, heaving lungfuls of air. I expected the bitter taste of poison, the suffocating paralysis. But the air was sweet and cool, tinged with the faint scent of eucalyptus and expensive linen. I was sitting up in a bed. My bed. But not the bed I had died in. The custom mahogany headboard was there, but the walls were painted a soft ivory. Not the charcoal grey Arthur had insisted on redecorating with in the winter of 2023. My heart hammered a frantic, irregular rhythm against my breastbone, I scrambled backward, the silk sheets tangling around my legs, my eyes darting frantically around the room. The morning sun was streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, catching the dust motes dancing in the air. I looked down at my hands. They were trembling, but they were warm, alive. I touched my face, tracing the line of my jaw, feeling the steady, strong pulse at my throat. I practically fell out of the bed, stumbling toward the vanity mirror. The woman staring back at me didn't look like a corpse. Her cheeks were flushed, her collarbones didn't protrude with the sickly, stressed thinness of my final months, and her eyes were bright and panicked. I lunged for the nightstand where my phone sat charging. I snatched it up, my thumb swiping the screen with frantic urgency. Friday, June 3rd, 2022. 8:15 a.m. I dropped the phone. It hit the thick Persian rug with a soft thud. I sank to my knees, pressing the heels of my hands into my eye sockets until bursts of color exploded behind my eyelids. June 3rd, 2022. Exactly 2 years and 4 months before my murder. I knew this date. The memory of it was seared into my brain. It was our 3rd wedding anniversary. It was also the exact day Arthur first brought me the documents to sign over my grandfather's protected trust fund, claiming it was for a lucrative venture capital opportunity that would double our holdings. I had signed it blindly, eager to prove my devotion, eager to show him I believed in his business acumen. That money, $40 million, was the seed capital he secretly used to build the shell company he and Chloe would later use to bleed Hayes Global dry. Clara. The voice froze the blood in my veins. I turned my head slowly. Arthur stood in the doorway of the master bathroom. He was wearing nothing but a towel slung low on his hips, his dark hair damp from the shower, a lazy, arrogant smirk playing on his lips. He looked exactly as he had in my memories, classically handsome, sharp jawline, eyes the color of a stormy sea, eyes I used to drown in. Now, looking at them, all I saw was the bottomless void of a sociopath. "Happy anniversary, darling," he said, his voice dropping into that low, practiced timbre he used when he wanted something. He crossed the room, holding a familiar red Cartier box in his right hand. A primal scream built in the back of my throat. My muscles coiled, every instinct screaming at me to lunge at him, to gouge those stormy eyes out of his skull, to make him bleed on the pristine carpet. My jaw clenched so hard I heard a faint pop in my ear. "Breathe," a cold, newly forged voice whispered in my mind. "If you kill him now, you go to prison. He dies a martyr. You lose. Breathe." I forced my hands to relax, uncurling my fingers from the fists they had formed. I pasted on a smile, a brittle, fragile thing that felt like it might shatter my face. I stood up, smoothing the front of my silk pajamas. "Happy anniversary, Arthur," I said. My voice was eerily steady. I didn't sound like the desperate, loving wife I had been yesterday. I sounded hollow. He didn't notice. The rest of the morning passed in a surreal, suffocating haze of domestic theatre. I sat across from Arthur at the custom marble dining table, sipping black coffee and watching him eat his grapefruit. I watched the way his jaw worked, the precise economical movements of his hands as he buttered his toast. This was the man who had stood on the other side of a door and listened to me choke on my own poisoned saliva. "I have some documents for you to look over later," Arthur said, casually, not glancing up from his Wall Street journal. Just some standard restructuring for the new venture fund. I'll need your signature to authorize the transfer from the grandfather clause. There it was. The trap. In my past life, I had smiled, kissed his cheek, and signed the papers that very evening without reading a single word. "Of course, darling," I said, my voice light, breezy. I took a slow sip of my coffee, relishing the heat of it sliding down my throat. "Bring them home tonight. We can go over them before our dinner reservations at Le Bernardin." He finally looked up, a flicker of satisfaction passing over his face. "You're the best wife a man could ask for, Clara." "I know," I replied. By 9 a.m., Arthur had left for the Hayes Global headquarters in Midtown. I waited until the private elevator doors hissed shut before I moved. The docile, adoring wife vanished the second the numbers above the elevator began to descend. I strode into my walk-in closet, bypassing the soft pastels and floral dresses Arthur preferred on me. I reached into the back and pulled out a sharply tailored, charcoal Tom Ford power suit. I paired it with black Christian Louboutin stilettos, the ones with the 120mm heels that Arthur said made me look too aggressive. I wanted to look aggressive. I wanted to look like a weapon. My first stop was not the office. My town car pulled up to a sleek glass high-rise on Park Avenue, home to Reed and Associates. Dominic Reed was a legal shark. He was ruthless, brilliant, and notoriously unyielding. More importantly, in my past life, Arthur had hated him. Dominic had once humiliated Arthur during a hostile takeover negotiation, pointing out a glaring flaw in Arthur's valuation model in front of an entire boardroom. Arthur had spent years nursing the grudge. If I needed someone to help me quietly build a guillotine for my husband, Dominic Reed was the only man for the job. The receptionist led me into a sprawling corner office overlooking the city. Dominic was sitting behind a massive slab of a desk. He looked up, his dark eyes assessing me with instant, razor-sharp clarity. "Mrs. Pendleton," he said, not standing, "to what do I owe the pleasure? Your husband usually employs the cowards over at Winston and Strawn." "My husband doesn't know I'm here, Mr. Reed," I said, walking to the leather guest chair and sitting down, crossing my legs with deliberate poise. "And I would like to keep it that way. I am here to retain you as my personal counsel, independent of Hayes Global." Dominic leaned back, steepling his fingers. "I charge $1,500 an hour, Mrs. Pendleton, and I don't do parking tickets or minor contract reviews. I need you to restructure a $40 million generation skipping trust," I said smoothly, pulling a sleek leather folder from my Birkin bag and tossing it onto his desk. "Right now, it requires only my signature to liquidate into a joint venture fund. I want it locked down. I want an ironclad clause inserted that requires an independent audit and a dual board approval for any transfer exceeding $50,000. And I want the beneficiary structure altered so that in the event of my death, every cent goes to charity. Not a dime goes to my spouse." Dominic paused. His eyes dropped to the folder, then back up to my face. The detached arrogance was gone, replaced by the calculating gleam of a predator who had just caught the scent of blood. "Are you anticipating dying any time soon, Mrs. Pendleton?" he asked softly. "I'm anticipating a war, Mr. Reed," I replied, meeting his gaze without flinching. "Can you draft it by noon?" "For you?" A slow, dangerous smile spread across his face. "I'll have it done by 11. Leaving the law firm, the air felt lighter. I had successfully severed Arthur's access to the $40 million he needed to launch his shadow company. Tonight, He would hand me the transfer papers. Tomorrow, when he tried to file them, they would bounce off Dominic's legal firewall, and Arthur would look like a fool. But starving him of capital was only step one. I needed to deal with the rot from the inside. At 1 p.m., I walked through the glass double doors of the executive floor at Hayes Global. The familiar hum of the office washed over me, but I saw it all through a new, cynical lens. Every smile felt false, every greeting a calculation. And then I saw her. Chloe was standing by the copy machine, laughing brightly at something a junior executive was saying. She wore a modest, cream-colored blouse and a pencil skirt. Her hair was pulled back in a practical clip. She looked like the perfect, hard-working assistant. The moment she saw me, her face lit up. "Clara!" she gasped, rushing over. The heavy, oppressive scent of Chanel No. 5 hit me like a physical blow. Arthur had bought her that perfume. He told me he bought it for his mother. "Happy anniversary," Chloe chirped, reaching out to hug me. Every muscle in my body seized. The memory of her voice. "Just wait for her heart to stop, Arthur," echoed so loudly in my ears, I thought the entire office could hear it. I wanted to grab her by her perfectly curled hair and slam her face into the marble reception desk. My hands curled into fists at my sides, my manicured nails digging painful crescents into my palms. "Control," I commanded myself. "Smile." I let her wrap her arms around me, holding my breath so I wouldn't have to smell her. "Thank you, Chloe," I said, pulling back just enough to maintain distance. I kept my voice warm, injecting a note of sisterly affection that made me want to vomit. "You're always so sweet." "Arthur told me he was taking you to Le Bernardin tonight," she said, her eyes dropping briefly to the Cartier bracelet on my wrist. A microscopic twitch of jealousy tightened the corner of her eye. I wouldn't have noticed it in my past life. Now it was glaringly obvious. She hated that I had the title, the ring, the public adoration. "He is," I sighed, playing the part of the smitten wife perfectly. The evening at Le Bernardin was a masterpiece of psychological theatre. Arthur sat across from me in a tailored charcoal suit, looking the part of the devoted, successful husband. He toasted our 3rd anniversary with a vintage 2012 Dom Perignon, his words dripping with a rehearsed tenderness that made the poached halibut taste like ash in my mouth. "To 3 wonderful years, Clara," he said, clinking his glass against mine, "and to a future where we build an empire together." "An empire," I echoed, taking a microscopic sip. When we returned to the penthouse, the air in the living room felt heavy, charged with an invisible current. Arthur loosened his Tom Ford tie and walked over to his leather briefcase, snapping the brass latches open with a sharp, metallic sound. He pulled out a thick stack of legal documents and laid them on the sleek mahogany desk. "Here they are, darling," he said, his voice dropping into that soothing, persuasive cadence. "The restructuring papers for the Grandfather Trust. Just standard procedure to optimize our tax efficiency before the new venture fund launches. If you sign on the final page, my attorneys can file it first thing in the morning." I walked over to the desk, the heels of my Louboutins clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. I picked up the heavy Mont Blanc pen he handed me. I didn't read the documents. I didn't need to. I knew exactly what they said. They were the instrument of my financial execution in a past life. I flipped to the signature page. I looked up at him, letting my gaze wander over his handsome, expectant face, His eyes were pinned to the pen in my hand, a tiny, involuntary muscle twitching in his jaw. He was desperate. I clicked the pen open. I lowered the nib to the paper. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, I scrawled a perfectly forged version of my signature. But I didn't sign my name. I signed Charlotte Hayes, my maternal grandmother's name, the original founder of the trust, a woman who had been dead for 15 years. To anyone casually glancing at the signature, it looked identical to my own cursive script. To a legal compliance officer or a bank auditor, it was a glaring red flag that rendered the document entirely fraudulent. I closed the folder and slid it back to him with a warm smile. "There you go, Arthur. All taken care of." "Thank you, Clara," he breathed, a massive wave of visible relief washing over his features. He scooped up the folder, practically vibrating with the dark triumph of a man who thought he had just stolen a fortune. He didn't check the signature. His arrogance was his blind spot. He never imagined the docile, love-struck girl he married would ever dare to trick him. The next morning, the trap began to snap shut. I woke up early and checked my phone. The Trojan Horse software I had handed to Chloe on the flash drive had executed flawlessly. My private laptop was now receiving a live stream of every keystroke from her encrypted work computer. I spent 3 hours scrolling through their digital betrayal. It was visceral, a physical punch to the gut, despite knowing it was coming. There were emails dating back to 6 months after our wedding. There were hidden bank accounts in the Cayman Islands, currently empty, waiting for the $40 million wire transfer that Arthur thought he had secured last night. But the real prize was an encrypted folder labeled H Project. I bypassed the security protocol using the administrative override keys I still possessed as the principal owner of Hayes Global. Inside were the blueprinted steps of my own murder. Medical articles on oleander poisoning, a forged medical history documenting my chronic cardiac arrhythmia, a drafted obituary. My hands shook, my fingernails biting so deeply into my palms that they drew tiny beads of blood. The sheer, cold-blooded malice of it was staggering. They hadn't just wanted my money. They wanted me erased from existence so they could live in my home, spend my fortune, and sleep in my bed. "You first, Chloe," I whispered to the empty room. At 11:30 a.m., I arrived at the Hayes Global headquarters. I didn't go to my office. I went straight to the Human Resources and Compliance Division on the 22nd floor, accompanied by Dominic Reed. Chloe was sitting at her desk outside Arthur's office, typing away on her computer, humming a soft tune. When she saw me walk in with a stern-looking Dominic and 2 security guards, her smile faltered. "Clara, what's going on?" she asked, her voice hitching slightly. "Chloe Davis," Dominic said, his deep voice cutting through the open office floor like a broadsword. "You are being placed on immediate administrative suspension, pending a forensic investigation into corporate espionage, embezzlement, and intellectual property theft." Chloe's face drained of color, turning a sickly, translucent white. She stood up so fast her chair rolled backward and hit the wall with a loud bang. "What? This is a mistake! Clara, tell him! I haven't done anything!" "Open the computer, Chloe," I said. My voice was a dead, flat calm. "Clara, please!" She reached for my arm, her fingers trembling wildly. I stepped back, avoiding her touch as if she were a venomous snake. "Do not touch me!" The compliance team took over her workstation. Within 5 minutes, utilizing the exact pathways my tracking software had exposed, they pulled up the hidden server logs. But I didn't just expose her corporate theft. I had quietly routed all of Arthur's illicit offshore shell company communications so that they appeared to originate entirely from her personal IP address. To the board of directors, it looked like Chloe was systematically stealing from both Hayes Global and Arthur Pendleton. "This isn't mine!" Chloe shrieked, her voice cracking as a crowd of her co-workers gathered to watch. Palms sweating, she frantically wiped them on her pencil skirt, her chest heaving as she suffocated under the weight of the evidence. "Arthur! Arthur, help me!" The door to Arthur's inner office flew open. He stepped out, his face a mask of simulated confusion and anger. "What the hell is going on out here?" "Mr. Pendleton," Dominic Reed said smoothly, stepping into Arthur's personal space. "We have discovered a massive data breach originating from Miss Davis's station. She has been funnily channeling proprietary trade secrets and corporate assets into a private Cayman account. Furthermore, the bank just flagged the trust transfer documents you submitted this morning as a fraudulent attempt using a deceased person's signature. We are investigating whether Miss Davis intercepted and tampered with those documents as well." Arthur froze. His eyes darted from Dominic to the compliance screen, to Chloe's terrified face, and finally to me. Arthur did not sleep that night. I sat on the plush velvet sofa in our living room, watching him pace the floor until the soles of his bespoke leather loafers left scuff marks on the herringbone wood. He drank Macallan 25 straight from the bottle, his tie undone, the collar of his white shirt stained with yellow patches of nervous sweat. Every few minutes, his hands shook so violently he nearly dropped the crystal tumbler. "It doesn't make sense," he muttered, tracing his fingers through his thinning hair. "Chloe wouldn't have the brilliant mind to pull off a data breach that massive. Someone helped her. Someone set this up." "Drink your scotch, Arthur," I murmured, keeping my voice smooth, a perfectly calm contrast to his spiraling paranoia. "The police will find out who her accomplice was. You have nothing to worry about if you're innocent." He snapped his head toward me, his eyes bloodshot and wild. The handsome, polished facade he had maintained for years was completely gone, replaced by the raw, ugly desperation of a trapped animal. "Of course I'm innocent, Clara. I'm the victim here. She tried to ruin my reputation." He slammed the bottle down on the side table and snatched up his phone. I watched his thumbs fly across the screen. I knew exactly who he was dialing. For the past 6 months, Arthur had been working with a mysterious offshore entity called Meridian Holdings. Meridian had promised to inject $50 million into his shadow company to help him launch a hostile takeover of Hayes Global, effectively stripping me of my birthright. He pressed the phone to his ear. He waited. 1 ring. 2 rings. Then the sleek black iPhone in my lap began to buzz. Arthur stopped pacing. He stared at my lap, his chest freezing mid-breath. He blinked, looking from his phone to mine, his brow furrowing in deep confusion. "Why? Why is my call routing to your personal line?" "It's not routing, Arthur," I said softly, picking up the phone and sliding the screen to decline the call. The silence that followed was suffocating. "I am Meridian Holdings." The first major twist hit him like a physical blow to the sternum. Arthur staggered backward, his knees hitting the edge of the armchair. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. His palms began to sweat so heavily that his phone slipped from his grip, clattering loudly against the floor. "You?" he finally whispered, his voice cracking into a high, pathetic register. "No, that's impossible. Meridian is based out of Zurich. I spoke with their managing director, a man named Henderson. An independent actor I hired through Dominic Reed's firm, I interrupted, standing up slowly. I smoothed down the fabric of my silk trousers, stepping over his dropped phone. Every contract you signed with Meridian, every piece of collateral you pledged to secure that $50 million loan, it belongs to me. You pledged your personal shares of Hayes Global. You pledged this penthouse. You even pledged your grandfather's old watch. I bought it all, Arthur. You don't own a single square inch of the dirt under your shoes. His breath came in short, ragged gasps. He looked at me, and for the first time in 2 lifetimes, he truly saw me. Not the naive, love-struck girl he could manipulate with a smile, but the architect of his execution. "You bitch!" he snarled, his face twisting into a mask of pure rage. He lunged across the space between us, his fingers curling into claws, aiming for my throat. I didn't flinch. I didn't step back. The heavy oak front door of the penthouse burst open with a deafening crash. 4 uniform NYPD officers and 2 federal agents flooded the foyer, weapons drawn. Dominic Reed walked in right behind them, a sleek leather briefcase in his hand. "Step away from her, Mr. Pendleton," the lead detective barked, his hand resting firmly on his service weapon. Arthur froze, his hands trembling in midair, just inches from my face. He slowly raised them, his eyes darting frantically around the room as the reality of his situation collapsed upon him. "On what charges? You can't arrest me for a corporate loan dispute. This is a civil matter. She's my wife. Spousal privilege, I have a right to half of everything she owns." "That brings us to the second oversight in your brilliant plan, Arthur," I said, my voice cutting through his panic like a scalpel. Dominic Reed stepped forward, unlatching his briefcase with 2 sharp clicks. He pulled out a certified document bearing a gold state seal and handed it to the federal agent. "Mr. Pendleton," Dominic announced, his voice booming with legal authority. "You have no spousal privilege because you are not, and have never been, legally married to Clara Hayes." Arthur's jaw dropped so low it looked dislocated. "What are you talking about?" "We had a wedding. 3 years ago at the St. Regis, we signed the license." "You signed a meticulously replicated piece of theatrical prop paper," I told him, looking down at my nails. "My grandfather never trusted you, Arthur. Before he died, he discovered you were already secretly married to a woman named Beatrice in a small county in Nevada when you were 21, a marriage you never legally dissolved. You are a bigamist. My grandfather didn't expose you immediately because he wanted to see how deep your greed ran. He left me a letter, sealed until my 25th birthday. I opened it a few months ago. This was the lie I had crafted with Dominic to explain my sudden, omniscient knowledge without revealing my rebirth. It was beautiful, ironclad, and entirely indisputable in a court of law. The marriage was a sham from day one, I continued, stepping closer to him until he could smell the expensive eucalyptus scent of my perfume. You have zero claim to the Hayes estate. You have zero corporate standing. And as of 10 minutes ago, the FBI downloaded the contents of the H Project folder from your private cloud server. They have the blueprints for my murder, Arthur. They have the search history for oleander poison. The last remnants of Arthur's arrogance completely disintegrated. He sank to his knees on the herringbone floor, his chest heaving as he sobbed, hot, pathetic tears streaming down his face, soaking into his expensive Italian collar. He reached out, trying to grab the hem of my trousers, his voice a whimpering crawl. "Clara, please. Please, I loved you." I was confused. Chloe forced me into it. "Please don't do this to me." I stepped backward, letting his hands fall empty onto the cold wood. "Take him away," I told the officers. The sound of the steel handcuffs clicking tightly around his wrists was the most beautiful melody I had ever heard. Some wounds never fully heal, but they do leave beautiful scars. I was given a second chance, a rare gift to rewrite my tragedy into a triumph, and I didn't waste a single second of it. If you felt the justice in my story today, please hit that like button. Share this with someone who deserves their own second chance, and subscribe to follow my next journey of rebirth and revenge.